He stared at the eviction notice in his hand. The stark, black letters felt like a death sentence for the quiet life he'd worked so hard to build. His landlord's words were still ringing in his ears, cold and final. The woman goes, or you both go, your choice. Outside, the rain lashed against the window, just like the storm raging inside him. He glanced from the notice to the living room, where a woman he barely knew was humming a soft lullaby to his sleeping daughter. In that moment, he knew this was about more than just giving a stranger a place to stay. This was a choice between the safe world he knew and the powerful, unspoken promise of the world she represented. A choice that would either cost him everything or give him more than he could ever imagine. Those first 24 hours were painfully awkward. The woman, she told him her name was Alara, moved through his small apartment like a ghost. She took a hot shower, accepted a set of his late wife's old sweats with a quiet, "Thank you," and ate the soup he made in total silence. She disappeared into the spare room, which was mostly used for storage, and shut the door. Mark was left alone in his living room, the storm in his head much louder than the one raging outside. What have I done? The storm didn't pass in a day. It lingered, trapping them all inside. And so, one night turned into two, then three. The rigid structure of Mark's life started to dissolve. Ilara was still a complete mystery. She only spoke when spoken to, and never offered a single detail about her past or how she ended up on that street corner. She spent most of her time in the spare room, the door always a little bit ajar, but never fully open. It was Lily, of course, who broke through her defenses first. Kids don't have social boundaries or calculated risks. To Lily, Alara wasn't a homeless person. She was just a new, interesting grown-up who was quiet and sad and smelled a little like rain. One afternoon, Lily just walked right into the spare room and handed Alara her favorite stuffed rabbit. "He's a good listener," Lily said, with all the seriousness a 7-year-old can have. For the first time, a real smile touched Alara's lips. It completely transformed her face, chasing some of the shadows away. She took the rabbit and just sat with Lily, listening as his daughter chattered on about her day from the doorway. Mark watched, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. The outside world, however, wasn't so understanding. His landlord, Mr. Henderson, saw Alara taking out the trash. An email landed in his inbox that night, a sharp reminder of the no long-term, unvetted guests clause in his lease. It was a warning shot. Then came the fight with his sister, Sarah. She'd stopped by and just froze when she saw Ilara helping Lily with a drawing at the kitchen table. Sarah pulled Mark into the kitchen, her voice a furious whisper. "Are you out of your mind, Mark? Who is that woman? You have a child in this house. You know nothing about her. She could be anyone. You fought so hard to create a safe home for Lily after everything, and you're just going to throw it all away for what? A stray you picked up off the street?" "Her name is Alara," Mark said, his own defensiveness surprising him. "And she needed help." "And what happens when she never leaves?" Sarah shot back. "What happens when your landlord kicks you out? When something happens to Lily, you are risking everything for a complete stranger." Her words hit home, because they were the exact same fears that kept him up at night. He didn't have any answers for her. He was just running on a gut feeling that this woman wasn't a threat, but he knew how crazy that sounded. Little clues about Alara's past started to surface. One evening, walking past a music store, she stopped dead, her eyes fixed on a grand piano in the window. The look of deep, painful longing on her face was so intense Mark had to look away. Another time, he was trying to remember a French lullaby his wife used to sing. From across the room, Ilara, without even looking up, murmured the entire second verse in perfect French. The most shocking moment came late one night. Lily had a nightmare, and Mark was trying to soothe her. He was humming a simple, off-key tune when Ilara appeared in the doorway. She walked over to Lily's small toy keyboard, sat on the floor, and began to play. It wasn't a kid's song. A complex, hauntingly beautiful piece of music filled the tiny room. The melody was so intricate, so full of sorrow and beauty. It seemed impossible that it was coming from a cheap plastic toy. It calmed Lily instantly, but it left Mark breathless. He stared at her. Where did you learn to play like that? Ilara pulled her hands away from the keyboard as if it had burned her. The light in her eyes vanished, replaced by that familiar, guarded look. I used to play a little, she mumbled, before quickly disappearing back to her room, leaving Mark alone in the dark, with the ghost of her music and 1,000 new questions. Who was this woman? The sky had been a bruised purple all afternoon, the air heavy with a promise of what was to come. By the time Mark picked Lily up from school, the first fat drops of rain were hitting the windshield. The radio was calling it a once-in-a-decade storm. Flash flood warnings, severe wind advisories, stay indoors, the announcer's grave voice warned. Driving his usual route home, the rain started coming down in blinding sheets. The wipers couldn't keep up. He slowed down as he approached 5th and Elm. And there she was. She'd moved under the flimsy awning of the coffee shop, which was doing almost nothing to protect her. She was drenched. Her thin jacket stuck to her frame, shivering as she hugged that guitar case like a life raft in a raging sea. Daddy! Lily's small voice came from the back seat. Why is that lady still outside? The radio man said everyone should go home. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Go home. For him, that meant warmth, a dry bed, a hot meal. For her, it meant this. Every instinct screamed at him to keep driving. He was a single father. His only responsibility was sitting in the booster seat behind him. Bringing a stranger into their home, a homeless person, wasn't just risky, it was reckless. What if she was dangerous? What if she had addiction or mental health problems? The questions were terrifying. But then a flash of lightning lit up her face. It wasn't the face of a threat. It was a face hollowed out by exhaustion, etched with a quiet, deep despair. And he knew he couldn't drive away. He couldn't go home to his warm apartment and talk to his daughter about kindness, knowing he'd left someone to suffer in a storm because he was afraid. Taking a deep breath that felt like a plunge into icy water, he flicked on his turn signal and pulled over. He rolled down the passenger window, the wind and rain rushing in. "Excuse me," he called out. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "The storm," he said, his voice feeling clumsy. "It's going to get much worse. You can't stay out here." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "I have a spare room. You could stay with us, just for the night, just until it passes." She just stared at him, her eyes flicking from his face to Lily's curious face in the rearview mirror. He saw something in her expression. Not just fear, but a deep, bone-deep weariness, as if she'd been offered help before, and it had always cost her something. "I don't have any money," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. almost lost in the wind. "I'm not asking for any," Mark replied, his voice softer now. "Just come on, get out of the rain." For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then with a slow nod, she stood, clutched her guitar case, and walked to the car. As she opened the door, bringing the scent of rain and cold concrete with her, Mark felt the solid ground of his life shift right under his feet. The thread had been pulled. Mark's life was built on one thing: routine. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., his alarm would go off, starting the clockwork of quiet, deliberate actions that kept his world, and the world of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, spinning. He was an accountant, a job that suited him perfectly. Numbers made sense. They were predictable. You could balance them, and at the end of the day, everything lined up just right. His life outside of work was pretty much the same. After his wife passed away 4 years ago, stability had become his religion. He'd learned the hard way how fast life can unravel, how one single event can pull the thread that undoes it all. So, he built walls, not with bricks, but with schedules and predictability. School runs at 8:15 a.m. sharp, work from 9 to 5, dinner at 6, Lily's bath time at 7, followed by exactly 2 bedtime stories. It was a small, contained life, but it was safe, and it was his. Every day, on his drive to the office, he saw her. She sat on a worn blanket on the corner of 5th and Elm, just outside the warm, fragrant bubble of the Daily Grind coffee shop. She was a silent part of the city, a ghost in the morning commute. She never held a sign, never asked for money, never even met his eye. She was just there. In her lap, she always cradled a battered black guitar case, holding it more like a shield than an instrument. Over time, he started noticing the small details, the way her long, dark hair was tangled in some places, but looked like she'd tried to keep it clean. The worn-out soles of her boots, cracked from a million unseen miles. But most of all, he noticed her stillness. While the world rushed past in a blur, she remained perfectly, profoundly still. She was a puzzle he had no desire to solve, a question mark in the life he'd so carefully balanced. So, for months, he did what everyone else did. He drove by. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He had his own world to protect, his own daughter to raise. He couldn't afford the risk of compassion. He couldn't afford to care. Mark took a huge risk based on nothing more than a gut feeling. Have you ever taken a leap of faith for a stranger? We'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if you're hooked on this one, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Weeks turned into a month. Alara had become a quiet, natural part of their small family. But the eviction notices from Mr. Henderson were getting more threatening. Mark's savings were draining fast. The risk wasn't some far-off possibility anymore. It was his daily reality. He was lying to his sister, dodging his landlord, and using money he'd saved for Lily's future. Still, the thought of asking Alara to leave felt wrong, impossible. The quiet bond she and Lily shared, the unspoken understanding growing between him and this mysterious woman, it was becoming an anchor in his life, and he realized, with a jolt of both shock and terror, that he was falling for her. The truth came out on a Saturday afternoon, on a day with rain pouring down just like the one that brought her into his life. He'd decided to finally clean out the hall closet. It was full of junk, but also a few boxes of his late wife's things he hadn't had the heart to open. Sitting on the floor, he opened a box labeled magazines and books. He idly flipped through old magazines. Then he picked up a glossy culture magazine called Encore, dated 10 years ago. He was about to toss it in the donation pile when a headline caught his eye. The Sound of Silence. Where did Ilaria Vance go? He froze, Ilaria. It was so close. His heart started hammering in his chest as he flipped to the page. And when he saw it, the world just fell away. There she was, a stunning, full-page black and white photo of a younger, vibrant version of the woman living in his spare room. Her hair was styled, her eyes blazing with confidence, and she was holding a Grammy Award. But the face, it was her, unmistakably. His hands shaking, he read the article. It told the story of the meteoric rise of Ilaria Vance, a piano and guitar prodigy hailed as the most soulful musician of her generation. Her debut album had gone multi-platinum. She was a virtuoso, a genius. And then, 10 years ago, at the absolute peak of her fame, she had vanished. The article described the tragedy. A horrific car accident on a rainy highway Ilaria had been driving. Her husband and their 5-year-old son were killed instantly. She survived, but with serious injuries to her hands and, the article guessed, to her soul. After a brief hospital stay, she checked out and disappeared. No interviews, no forwarding address. She simply vanished. And the world had been looking for her ever since. The air left his lungs, the guitar case, the sad melodies, the perfect French, the deep, constant sorrow in her eyes. It all clicked into place, forming a brilliant, tragic picture. He stood up, the magazine clutched in his hand, and walked to the spare room. The door was open a crack. She was sitting on the bed, just staring at the rain. "Ilara?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. She turned. He didn't say another word. He just held up the magazine, open to her picture. Her eyes widened, and in that instant, the walls she'd built for a decade just crumbled into dust. A choked sob escaped her, a sound of such complete, heart-shattering pain that it brought tears to his own eyes. The secret was out, and as she wept, she finally told him everything. The crushing guilt that had consumed her. The belief that she didn't deserve to live when her family had died. The fame that felt like a joke. The music that felt like a betrayal. She couldn't touch an instrument without seeing their faces, without hearing the sound of screeching tires. So she walked away from it all, convinced the only way to pay for her sin was to have nothing and be nothing, to become a ghost on a street corner, slowly fading away. After that confession, everything in the small apartment shifted. Mark looked at her and no longer saw a risk or a mystery. He saw a woman so crushed by grief that it had stolen her identity, her art, and her will to live his confusing feelings for her. The compassion, the curiosity, the attraction, suddenly crystallized into something much deeper, much purer. It was a fierce, protective love for the survivor, not awe for the celebrity. Letting the secret out, as painful as it was also a relief. The tension between them evaporated, replaced by a raw, fragile honesty. They talked for hours. She spoke of her son, her husband, and the music they used to make. He spoke of his wife, of his own loneliness and fear, and his desperate fight to build a safe world for Lily. They were two people hollowed out by loss, and by sharing that vulnerability, they finally started to heal. Mark never pushed her about the music, but one evening, he brought it up gently. "It wasn't a betrayal, Ilara," he said softly, using her real name. "It was a gift, it still is." He nodded toward the black guitar case in the corner. "Maybe," Maybe it's time to let them hear you again, not the world, just us. Fear fought with longing in her eyes. For days, she couldn't touch it, but she would watch Lily play on her toy keyboard, a small, sad smile on her face. Then one night, with Mark and Lily sitting on the floor beside her, she finally knelt and unlatched the case. Inside, nestled in worn velvet, was a beautiful acoustic guitar, famous to anyone who had followed her career. With a trembling hand, she reached out and plucked a single string. A clear note rang out in the quiet room. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time, they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of remembrance, of release, like a long overdue homecoming. 6 months later, the eviction notices were a distant memory. Mark, with a new confidence and light in his eyes, had landed a much better paying job. He and Alara had pooled their resources. Not the millions in untouched royalties, but his small savings, and found a slightly larger apartment with a small yard for Lily. The world still didn't know that Ilaria Vance had been found. There were no press conferences, no comeback tours. Her return to music wasn't some big public spectacle. It was a quiet, private resurrection. It happened in the small moments of their new life together, in the melodies she hummed while making breakfast, the chords she strummed while Lily did her homework, and the new songs she started to write at the kitchen table late at night. Her new music was different. It didn't have the grand production of her past, but it was filled with something far more powerful: the undeniable truth of her journey. It held the echoes of her grief, the weight of her punishment, and the bright, soaring light of her redemption. It was the sound of a woman who had lost everything and, through the kindness of a stranger, had finally found her way back to herself. One evening, Mark came home from work to the most beautiful music he had ever heard. He stood in the doorway and just watched. Alara was on the living room floor, playing her guitar. Lily was curled up beside her, head in her lap, fast asleep. The song was for them, a song of gratitude, of family, of a love found in the most hopeless place. The single dad who had risked everything hadn't just saved a homeless woman. He had brought a genius back from the dead, and in doing so, had finally made his own fractured family whole. It's amazing how true connection can be found in the most unexpected places, and how sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need to see it. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you'll subscribe for more stories that explore the very best of what makes us human.